Thanks for watching Endgame Economics. If you enjoyed this video, hit subscribe. It's completely free for you, and it helps us continue making more videos like this.
Imagine standing on the floor of a manufacturing plant outside Minsk. The machinery is old, the fluorescent lights flicker with age, and there is an official 5-year plan pinned to the wall. The state prints the paychecks, owns the massive assembly lines, and dictates exactly where all the output is sold. You are looking at a living artifact. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the Belarusian government simply held on to the commanding heights of the economy and never let go. By any conventional metric, this rigid structure should have collapsed. It borders an active war zone and operates under the heaviest Western sanctions in Europe. It also survived a near-fatal internal crisis. In 2020, massive protests swept the country as millions of citizens demanded an end to a 3-decade autocracy. Yet official statistics present a baffling picture. The economy recently posted a 1.3% growth rate. Inflation remains officially contained, and the central bank's international reserves recently hit a record $15.7 billion. Those numbers do not reflect a thriving, organic growth engine. They are the output of a highly tuned survival machine, sustained by a series of quiet, precarious economic illusions. The first illusion revolves around the country's sprawling domestic manufacturing base. The regime points to giant, vertically integrated factories, producing trucks and agricultural equipment, as proof that their industrial model works on the world stage. The true mechanism keeping those assembly lines moving is a massive energy subsidy. Belarus pays for natural gas at a deeply discounted rate, pinned by international treaty to whatever domestic buyers pay inside Russia's borders. This chart shows exactly how much of an advantage that provides. While an EU manufacturer pays anywhere from $350 to over $400 for 1,000 cubic meters of gas on the spot market, a Belarusian factory pays roughly $129. That financial lifeline requires the surrender of national sovereignty. Following the closure of European trade routes, Russia now controls the logistics for up to 90% of Belarusian exports, holding complete leverage over Minsk's economic arteries. To maintain the discount, Minsk has wired nearly 300 of its state enterprises directly into Moscow's military-industrial complex, actively churning out weapons components to supply the conflict in Ukraine. These factories do not generate organic profit. They exist as a geopolitical tool, trading national independence for the cheap energy required to stave off mass unemployment. The state also claims it defeated the crushing wave of Western financial restrictions through economic resilience. The reality comes down to a geological accident. Belarus sits on massive deposits of potash, a potassium-rich mineral salt that is absolutely essential for global agriculture. It has no synthetic substitute, and it acts as the regime's primary oxygen tank for hard foreign currency. The entire sector operates on a monolithic scale, controlled entirely by the state. Before the international clampdown, this one industry brought in billions of dollars a year. When sanctions cut off their primary shipping routes, the state dumped potash onto the global market at a 50% discount. They pushed record volumes through Russian railways, accepting drastically thinner margins just to keep the cash flowing. As the financial strain deepened, the government turned to a deeply cynical trade. They began using their own citizens as diplomatic leverage to secure renewed access to Western markets. In a series of negotiated deals, the state released hundreds of political prisoners, including prominent opposition figures like Maria Kalesnikova and Nobel laureates, in direct exchange for Washington lifting sanctions on their fertilizer sector. Bypassing these restrictions relies on hostage negotiation. The state is systematically cashing in its sole geological asset and its own people to buy a few more months of liquidity. Domestically, the government projects an image of complete stability. Despite sharing a border with a high-inflation Russian economy, official Belarusian inflation stays low, while nominal worker wages have actually climbed. The state regulates the cost of almost everything, creating an inflationary overhang. When you mandate that prices cannot rise, the underlying costs still increase. The financial losses are absorbed by state banks through subsidized loans. The pressure doesn't vanish. It accumulates beneath the surface. A low inflation metric indicates the government is temporarily winning a wrestling match against basic math. The longer they hold the numbers down, the more violently those prices will correct. The state can cap the price of bread, and it can borrow billions to keep the lights on. It cannot mandate the continued presence of its people. For 15 years, the high-tech park on the edge of Minsk operated entirely differently from the rest of the country. Software engineers enjoyed a special tax zone, minimal bureaucracy, and European-level salaries, creating a highly profitable exception to the Soviet model. The modern architecture of the IT sector proved what Belarus was capable of building. Developers here created apps and gaming platforms used by billions worldwide, generating massive export revenue. Following the crackdowns in 2020, that entire ecosystem packed its bags. Tens of thousands of programmers, founders, and engineers crossed the border into Poland and Lithuania, taking their tax revenue and intellectual property with them. The companies watched their senior talent vanish. The country lost the technical leads, surgeons, and experienced managers who take decades to train. Political refugees sometimes return when governments change. Economic migrants, earning multiple times their old salaries and building permanent new lives across the border, have very little incentive to ever go back. An economy designed strictly for regime survival eventually cannibalizes its own foundation. The state can extend energy subsidies and negotiate prisoner swaps, but it cannot buy back the generation it lost.